Alara found her compartment easily. The corridor was softly lit, the carpet a deep, quiet blue. A gentle sway already hinted at the motion to come. She placed her overnight bag on the upper rack, leaving her small, worn satchel on the seat beside her. Through the window, the last amber glow of the city station was beginning to slide backward, the platform lights stretching into brief golden lines before softening into a blur. She latched the window down just an inch. Dust enough to let in the feed like some beside Amal, to let in the cool night air but not the clamor. Hiss of the brakes releasing was a long slusk sisisk, and then the first faint shudder moved through the floor, a promise of the journey ahead. The carriage settled into its motion with a soft three-part rhythm. A steady da-da-dum from the wheels, a low constant hum from the engine, and a subtle, sighing creak from the fixtures as they accommodated gentle dusk. Alara leaned her head against the cool glass, not looking at anything in particular, just feeling the vibration travel up through her temple and into the quiet of her skull. The city lights outside were no longer distinct windows or street lamps, but a flowing river of pale gold and soft white, streaking and then fading. It was a sight she had always found hypnotic, a kind of moving constellations. Her breathing, which had been shallow since she'd left her apartment, began to slow to match the unhurried tempo of the wheels. She closed her eyes for a moment, and the rhythm carried her backward in time, not to a place of urgency, but to another kind of quiet passage. It was just a few hours ago, really. The late afternoon light had been slanting through the high, dusty panes of glass of the community greenhouse. The air inside was warm and humid, smelling of damp earth, of crushed mint from a pot someone had brushed against, of the green, slightly spicy scent of tomato leaves. She had been there alone, which was how she preferred it on Wednesdays. Her task was simple, a weekly ritual she had taken on without fanfare. She picked up the long-spouted watering can from the hook by the door, its metal cool and solid in her hand. The greenhouse was long and narrow, divided by a central stone path that was always slightly damp. To her left and right were benches at varying heights, crowded with an assortment of pots and trays. There were the sturdy, dependable herbs, rosemary, standing tall like miniature trees, thyme spreading in low-lying woody mats, basil, with its soft, fragrant leaves catching the light. There were the more delicate seedlings, tiny green shoots pushing up through dark soil in plastic cells, each one a small, perfect statement of potential. There were the larger, leafy plants in ceramic pots, ferns with their fronds unfurling like slow green fireworks, and a huge, sleepy, slipped-looking geranium, whose leaves felt slightly fuzzy to the touch. Alara moved slowly down the path, her footsteps soft on the wet stone.
She started at the beginning with the rosemary. She tilted the watering can, and the water emerged not in a torrent, but in a controlled, gentle stream from the rose, the little perforated spout that made it rain. The sound it made was the first layer of the memory, the soft, persistent shh of water meeting soil. She watched the dark earth drink it in, the color deepening instantly from a dusty brown to a rich, wet black. A few droplets escaped and ran down the sides of the terracotta pot, leaving dark trails. She knew how much each plant needed, a knowledge that was felt in her arm and wrist rather than thought out. The rosemary got a good soaking, the basil less, the tiny seedlings just a few careful drips from the spout, enough to moisten the mountain in their fragile roots. The rhythm of it was a kind of meditation. Move to the next pot, tilt, watch, listen. The water shed onto the soil. Move to the next, tilt, watch, listen. The scent of the watered earth was a separate, profound smell, a deep, living perfume that rose up from each pot as it was given drink. It was a smell of quiet life, of slow, patient growth. She moved from the sturdy herbs to the delicate seedlings, her movements becoming even more careful, more measured. The sound of the water here was different on the tray beneath the cells, a lighter, pattering sound like a brief, gentle rain. She could see each droplet land, forming tiny, glistening beads on the soil before being absorbed. Her mind, which had been buzzing with the faint residue of the day's small anxieties, began to quiet. There was only the next pot, the next tilt, the next soft sound. She reached the large fern in the corner. It needed a good drink, its soil often dry by midweek. She poured slowly, watching the water pool slightly on the surface before sinking down between the roots. As she did, she noticed a single browning frond at the base. Without thinking, she set the can down, and with her thumb and forefinger, she gently pinched the dead frond at its stem. It came away easily, and she dropped it into the small compost bucket by her feet. It was a tiny act of tending, of removal, but it felt satisfying in a simple, uncomplicated way. The plant looked a little tidier, a little healthier. She picked up the can again and finished watering, the shh sound resuming its peaceful cadence. By the time she reached the far end of the greenhouse, where the last benches held a few quiet succulents and a sprawling, fragrant jasmine, her mind was clear. The buzzing had stopped. There was only the warm, humid air, the green world around her, and the simple, repetitive task. The sun had been lower when she started, and now its light was a deep honeyed gold, slanting through the glass and illuminating the watering can in her hand, making the droplets on its spout sparkle. It cast long, tense shadows from the pots across the stone path.
She finished the jasmine, giving its soil a light sprinkle, its small, white, star-shaped flowers releasing a faint, sweet scent into the air as the water splashed near its base. Her work was done. She took the bucket of trimmings and empty pots to the small utility sink in the corner, rinsing them out. The sound of the tap water, a sharper, more fusket splash than the watering can's shh, was a gentle punctuation. She dried her hands on the front of her apron, the rough cotton soft against her skin. Then she began the final ritual, closing the greenhouse for the night. She moved along the rows, her eyes doing a slow final scan. All the pots were dark with moisture. The air was still and warm, saturated with the smells of her work. She could see the reflection of the interior lights, which she had turned on as the daylight began to fade, in the panes of glass, small, steady squares of yellow in a world that was turning a deep twilight blue. She walked to the large double doors at the front. The metal latch was cool under her palm. She pulled them together, the hinges giving a soft, familiar groan. The change was immediate. The sounds from the outside world, the distant murmur of the road, a bird's last call, were cut off. The greenhouse became a silent, sealed world of its own. She turned the key in the lock, a solid, satisfying click that signaled an end. Then she turned off the lights, one bank at a time. The first switch flipped with a soft snap, and a section of the greenhouse fell into shadow, the plants becoming dark shapes against the slightly light panes. Another snap, another shadow. A final snap, and the entire space was plunged into a soft ambient darkness, lit only by the faint, residual glow of the twilight sky filtering through the glass. It was a peaceful, sheltered darkness. The memory held her for a long time, the details so clear and so calm, the warmth of the air, the smell of wet earth, the sound of the water, the quiet satisfaction of the closing latch. It was a memory of a small, contained world where everything had its place, and her role was simple and kind. It was the opposite of the racing, formless thoughts that had been chasing her all day. The train's rhythm had been the soundtrack to this memory, a constant, soothing pulse underneath it all. When she finally became fully aware of the present again, the city lights were gone. Outside, her window was a profound, moving darkness, punctuated only by the occasional, distant cluster of lights from a sleeping town, or the brief, ghostly flash of a farmhouse and its outbuildings, appearing and disappearing in an instant. The train's interior lights had been dimmed to a low, warm amber. The compartment was very quiet. She shifted in her seat, feeling the soft fabric of the upholstery beneath her fingers. She drew the thin blanket from the luggage rack and unfolded it, the fabric rustling softly. She draped it over her lap and legs, its weight a gentle, comforting pressure.
The motion of the train seemed deeper now, more pronounced. The da-da-dum was slower, as if the tracks themselves were more widely spaced here, allowing the wheels to speak in a more measured, deliberate cadence. She could feel a slight lateral sway, a gentle romp from side to side that was different from the forward push. It was like being in a very large, very slow cradle. She let her head rest fully against the window, the vibration a constant, soothing hum against her cheekbone. The train began to slow. There was no announcement, just a gradual easing of the rhythm, the spaces between the da-dum sounds stretching out. The low hum of the engine dropped in pitch, becoming a deeper growl, and then subsiding into a near-silent purr. She saw the lights of a small station materialize from the darkness. A single platform, a low building with a warmly lit window, a sign with a name she couldn't read from this distance and didn't need to. The train slid into the station with a long, slow hiss of air brakes, coming to a stop with a final, gentle jolt that barely disturbed the blanket on her lap. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of the train's idle systems, a soft, rhythmic ticking from somewhere nearby, and the muffled sounds of the station. A distant cough, the slam of a carriage door further down the line, the scuff of footsteps on the platform, growing fainter and then gone. In this pocket of stillness, the world outside the window was a perfectly framed tableau. The illuminated station, the empty platform stretching away into the dark, the single lit window where she could just make out the silhouette of a person moving slowly, perhaps a station master closing up for the night. It was a scene of utter, mundane tranquility. No one was hurrying. No one looked stressed. The light from the window cast a long golden rectangle across the concrete platform, and it was so still, so ordinary, that it felt like a memory in the making. She watched it, her breathing slow and even. The train was not waiting. It was simply paused, resting before continuing its work. The idea of this pause, this shared moment of inactivity between the engine and the dark, sleeping country around them, was deeply disturbing. After a time that had no urgency, the brakes released with another sigh. The engine's hum returned, soft at first, then building. The wheels found their rhythm again, a slow, grinding engagement before settling into the familiar da-da-dum. The lit window of the station slid backward, shrinking, and was soon absorbed into the general darkness. The train was moving again. Ilara felt the slight increase in pressure against her back as the carriage accelerated. The landscape outside was utterly black now, a void that her eyes didn't even try to penetrate. All visual interest had been removed, leaving only the sound and the motion. The compartment felt smaller, more intimate.
The warm light of her reading lamp, she had switched it on at some point without remembering doing so, created a soft pool of gold on the small table, and on her own hands resting on the blanket. She was not reading. She was not thinking in any active, structured way. Her mind was simply observing, in a distant and uninvolved manner, the sensations of her body, the weight of the blanket, the slight ache in her shoulders from carrying her bag earlier, now softening into a dull, pleasant awareness. The rhythm of the train, which had become so familiar, it was almost like a second pulse, separate from, but synchronized with her own heartbeat. The sound was no longer just the it was a composite of every vibration in the carriage. The faint whistle of air through the window seal, the tiny clink of the glass in the door, the deep foundational thrum that she felt more in her bones than heard with her ears. Her eyelids grew heavy, not from exhaustion, not from profound, deep-seated relaxation. The need to watch, to analyze, to engage with the world had simply evaporated, carried away by the steady, forward motion. The greenhouse memory had been a door into this state, but now the door had closed, leaving her in a quiet room of pure sensation. She thought of the plants, their roots in the dark, wet soil, drinking slowly in quiet of the sealed greenhouse. They were not doing anything. They were simply being, existing in their slow, green way, sustained by the care they had been given. She felt a parallel to that stillness. She was being carried. The train was doing all the work, following its predetermined path, needing no guidance from her. Her only task was to be here, in this seat, feeling this motion. The train began to climb a grade, the engine's note deepening with effort. It was a slow, powerful sound, a mechanical growl that was not aggressive, but rather a statement of steady, unwavering purpose. She felt the change in the sway, the carriage leaning gently into a curve. She imagined the train moving through a valley, hugging the side of a dark hill. She pictured, without straining, too, the great silent shapes of trees on either side, their branches bare against a sky that would be full of stars if she could see it. The train was a thread of light and sound and gentle motion, weaving through a vast, sleeping landscape. It was a small, safe bubble of warmth and life, moving through the immense, quiet dark. The image was so calming. It was almost a physical sensation, a softening in her chest. She let her eyes close completely this time. The darkness behind her eyelids was no different from the darkness outside the window. The rhythm of the train was the only landmark, the only constant. It was the pulse of the night itself. She matched her breathing to it. In for 3 beats, out for 4. In for 3, out for 4.
The air she drew in was cool from the window crack, and it smelled of the night, of damp grass, of cold stone, of the clean metallic scent of the rails themselves, all blended into one indescribable nocturnal essence. She was aware, in a very distant way, of her thoughts. They were no longer racing. They were floating, like lazy clouds in a vast, calm sky. A thought about a letter she needed to write would drift past, and she would not grasp it or follow it. Simply continue on its slow path and disappear over the horizon of her mind. A fragment of a melody would surface, and she would not hum it or name it. It would just dissolve back into the silence from which it came. The greenhouse, the train, the dark landscape. They were all images that came and went, leaving no trace, demanding no action. There was only the present moment, and the present moment was simply this: the vibration, the hum, the gentle sway, the cool air, the weight of the blanket, the slow, rhythmic beat of the wheels on the track. The train passed another house, its presence marked only by a brief, muted glow through a curtained window, then darkness again. The intervals between these signs of life were growing longer. The world was becoming more empty, more quiet. The da-da-dum of the wheels sounded louder in the greater silence, more defined. It was a sound that could continue forever. It was the sound of a journey without a desperate hurry, a passage that was an end in itself. There was no urgency to arrive. The arrival would happen in its own time, as gently and inevitably as the plants in the greenhouse, had absorbed their water. For now there was only the moving, and the moving was a form of rest. Alara's body felt heavy, settled deep into the seat. The tension that had lived for so long in her jaw, between her shoulder blades, and behind her eyes had finally, completely released. She was not asleep, but she was in the place that comes just before it, a twilight of the senses, where the external world is a dim pleasant hum, and the internal world is a quiet, empty room. The train continued its passage. It climbed, it descended, it curved, it straightened, all with that same, steady, unhurried rhythm. The night deepened around it. The stars, unseen, wheeled slowly overhead. The moon, perhaps a sliver, perhaps a full, bright disk, poured its silent, silver light over fields and forests and sleeping towns, a light that did not reach her in her warm, moving capsule, but which she could feel, somehow, as a part of the vast, quiet peace of the night. She did not track time. Minutes and hours had lost their sharp edges. There was only the continuous flow. The water had flowed into the soil, and the rain was flowing through the night. It was all the same current. She was a part of it, carried along without effort, without need.
Her last conscious thought was not a thought at all, but a feeling, a deep cellular knowledge that she was safe and held and moving through the dark toward rest. The rhythm of the wheels was a lullaby, and the darkness outside was a blanket, and the hum of the train was the sound of the world itself, breathing slowly and deeply in its sleep. The train moved on, a single, steady pulse in the heart of the night, carrying its quiet passenger through the endless, peaceful dark. The train's steady pulse continued, a deep and unbroken murmur beneath the quiet of the carriage. Outside, the darkness remained absolute, a seamless void that swallowed the landscape whole. Yet within the compartment, the world was small, warm, and alive with subtle textures. The faintest whisper of fabric as Alara's fingers twitched against the blanket, the soft give of the seat cushion beneath her, the way the lamplight pooled in the creases of her palms like liquid gold. The air smelled of old wood and polished metal, of the faintest trace of rain that had clung to the window earlier in the evening, now dried but leaving behind a ghost of dampness, a memory of moisture in the air. Somewhere down the corridor, a door clicked shut, not with urgency, but with the quiet finality of a hand releasing a latch after a long day. Footsteps followed, slow, deliberate, the kind of steps that belonged to someone who had no reason to hurry. They paused outside her compartment, hesitated for the span of a breath, then continued on, fading into the gentle hum of the train's motion. The sound was so unobtrusive that it might have been part of the carriage itself, another layer in the symphony of creaks and sighs that made up the train's quiet language. Alara's eyelids, heavy but not yet closed, fluttered at the interruption, then settled again. The footsteps had not been for her. They had simply been passing, like a leaf drifting on a slow current. The train leaned into another curve, its motion smooth and unhurried, as if it, too, were savoring the journey. The slight shift in weight pressed Alara deeper into the seat, her body sinking into the embrace of the upholstery. The blanket, folded neatly over her lap, had slipped just enough to expose the back of one hand to the cool air of the compartment. She did not adjust it. The contrast between the warmth of the wool and the chill of the air was pleasant, a quiet dialogue between comfort and sensation. Her fingers, half-curled, rested against the fabric of her skirt, the tips brushing the rougher texture of the train's carpet beneath. The carpet was thin, worn smooth by countless passengers before her. Its pattern faded into indistinct shapes that no longer held any meaning. It was just texture now, just something to press against, to ground her in the physical world without demanding attention. Outside the window, The darkness was no longer a void. It had begun to soften, to take on depth.
Not with light, but with the suggestion of shapes. Hills rising and falling like the slow breath of the earth. The occasional glint of something reflective, perhaps a pond or a stretch of wet stone, catching the faintest trace of starlight. The train was moving through a landscape that was not empty, but simply asleep, its details hidden by the night. Alara imagined the fields stretching away on either side, their furrows damp with dew, the grass heavy with the weight of the dark. She pictured the hedgerows tangled and thick, their branches bare, but for the occasional stubborn leaf clinging on, rustling softly in the night breeze. The wind outside would be cool, carrying the scent of turned earth and distant rain, of wood smoke from a farmhouse chimney miles away. She could almost smell it, though the window was sealed tight. It was a scent that existed only in her mind, a ghost of sensation, but it was enough. The train's rhythm shifted subtly as it began to descend a gentle slope. The engine's hum deepened, not with effort but with a kind of contented sigh, as if the train itself were relaxing into the downhill stretch. The sway of the carriage became more pronounced, a slow, gentle rocking that was almost imperceptible unless one was paying attention. Alara was paying attention, but not in the way she might have earlier in the evening. She was not analyzing or cataloguing the sensations. She was simply allowing them to exist, to pass through her like the current of a river. The rocking was not unlike the motion of a boat on calm water, and for a moment she imagined herself on a lake, the train transformed into a vessel drifting with the tide. The water would be black and still, reflecting nothing, the surface broken only by the occasional ripple from a fish breaking the surface or a breath of wind. The thought was fleeting, dissolving almost as soon as it formed, leaving behind only the faintest impression of cool water against her skin. A distant sound reached her, so faint it might have been imagined. A bell, perhaps, tolling somewhere in the night. It was not the sharp, insistent clang of a city clock, but something softer, more distant, the kind of sound that carried across open land on a still night. It rang once, twice, then faded into the silence, leaving no echo. Alara did not count the chimes. She did not wonder what time it was, or what the bell might signify. It was simply a sound that existed, a brief interruption in the quiet, like the footsteps in the corridor. It was gone before it could demand anything of her. The compartment was warm, almost too warm, but she did not mind. The heat was soft, enveloping, like the air in a greenhouse on a winter morning before the sun had fully risen. She thought again of the plants, their leaves heavy with moisture, their roots drinking slowly from the damp soil. There was no hurry in that world, no need to rush toward growth or bloom.
The plants simply were, existing in their own time, sustained by the care of unseen hands. She felt a kinship with them in that moment, a shared stillness, a shared patience. The train, too, was like that, moving, but not in a rush. Carrying its passengers, but not demanding anything of them. It was a vessel of quiet, of rest, of the slow passage of time. The lamplight flickered, just once, a brief hesitation in its steady glow. It was not the harsh flicker of a bulb about to die, but something gentler, like a breath held and then released. Alara's gaze drifted toward it, her eyes half-lidded, submerged. Her vision blurred at the edges. The light was soft, diffuse, casting long, lazy shadows across the compartment. The shadows stretched and contracted with the train's motion. She was like that, moving, shifting like the slow dance of leaves in a breeze. She watched them, her mind drifting with them, following their slow, meandering paths across the wall. There was no pattern to their movement, no meaning to be found. They were simply there, existing in space between light and dark. between motion and stillness, as a faint scent reached her. Tea, perhaps, or something warm and herbal. It was not strong enough to be intrusive, but it was there. A hint of comfort drifting through the air. She imagined a cup steaming on a tray somewhere down the corridor, its surface rippling with the motion of the train. A curl of vapor rising into the cool air. The thought of it was pleasant, but she did not feel the need to seek it out. The scent was enough, a promise of warmth and quiet, of a moment that did not need to be claimed to be enjoyed. It was like the memory of a fire on a cold night. The way the heat lingers in the mind, long after the flames have died down. The train's motion changed it again, the rhythm of the wheels subtly altering as it passed over a stretch of track that was smoother, newer. The sound became softer, less pronounced. The dum fading into something closer to a whisper. The carriage dachon glide, chase on the floor, and walls smoothing out into a gentle, almost imperceptible hum. It was as if the train had found a pocket of stillness in the night, a stretch of track that allowed it to move without effort, without sound. Alara felt the change in her bones, a deep, resonant shift that settled into her chest like a sigh. The sensation was not unlike the moment, a long exhale, when the body is at its most relaxed, its most at ease. She let herself sink deeper into it, her shoulders loosening, her jaw unclenching, the last of the day's tension dissolving into the quiet. Outside, the darkness had begun to thin, not with the approach of dawn, but with the suggestion of something else. Fog, perhaps, or a low cloud pressing down on the land. The shapes beyond the window were no longer sharp and defined, but soft, blurred at the edges, like a painting left out in the rain.
The train moved through it as if through a dream, the landscape outside becoming a series of impressions rather than a scene. A tree loomed suddenly from the mist, its branches skeletal and bare, then was swallowed again by the dark. A fence appeared, its posts marching in a straight line before vanishing into the gloom. The fog muted the sounds of the night, wrapping the train in a cocoon of quiet. Even the wheels seemed to move more softly, their rhythm absorbed by the damp air. Alara's breathing had slowed, matching the pace of the train, in for 3 beats, out for 4. The air she drew in was cool and damp, carrying the scent of the fog, earthy, green, faintly metallic. It filled her lungs, then left again, taking with it the last of her thoughts, the last of her awareness of anything beyond the compartment. She was not asleep, but she was no longer entirely awake either. She existed in the space between, a place where the body was heavy and still, and the mind was a quiet, empty room, the lamplight, the sway of the train, the cool air against her skin. These were the only things that anchored her to the world. Everything else had faded into the background, becoming part of the gentle hum of existence. The train passed through a small town, its presence announced only by the brief glow of streetlights cutting through the fog. The lights were warm, golden, the kind that belonged to a place where people lived quietly, where the nights were long, and the mornings slow. They flickered past the window in a slow procession, each one a brief interruption in the dark, then gone. Alara did not count them. She did not wonder about the town, or the people sleeping within it. The lights were simply there, like the chime of the distant bell, like the scent of tea in the air. They existed, and then they did not, leaving no trace behind. The fog thickened, pressing against the windows like a living thing. The glass was cool to the touch, damp with condensation. Alara's fingers, still resting on the blanket, twitched slightly, as if reaching for the window without conscious thought. She did not lift her hand, but the idea of pressing her palm against the glass, of feeling the cold dampness against her skin, was pleasant. She imagined the sensation, the slight resistance of the fog, the way it would cling to her fingers, the way the cold would seep into her bones. It was a thought that lingered for a moment, then dissolved like all the others. The train's motion had become almost imperceptible, the sway so gentle it was like being rocked in a cradle. The sound of the wheels was a distant murmur, a lullaby sung in a language she did not need to understand. It was enough to know that the train was moving, that it was carrying her forward, that it would continue to do so without any effort on her part. She was a passenger in the truest sense of the word, carried along by forces beyond her control, beyond her need to control.
The thought was freeing, like the moment when a held breath is finally released, when the body surrenders to the pull of gravity and simply falls. The compartment was warm, the air thick with the scent of wool and old wood, and the faintest trace of something sweet. Perhaps the remains of a pastry eaten by a previous passenger, or the ghost of a perfume long since faded. It was a scent that belonged to the train itself, to the countless journeys it had made, the countless lives it had carried. Breathed it in, letting it fill her lungs, letting it become a part of her. She was not separate from the train, not separate from the night. She was a part of it, a single note in the symphony of motion and quiet, of warmth and dark. Outside, the fog had begun to lift, revealing glimpses of the landscape once more. The shapes were still soft, still blurred, but they were becoming more defined. A stand of trees, their branches heavy with moisture, a field stretching away into the dark, its surface glistening with dew. The train moved through it all, a silent observer, a witness to the slow, unhurried passage of the night. There was no rush, no need to arrive. The journey was the destination. The motion was the rest. Alara's eyelids had grown heavier, her vision blurring at the edges. The lamplight had become a soft golden haze, a pool of warmth in the cool air of the compartment. She did not fight the heaviness. She let it pull her down, let it settle over her like a blanket, like the fog outside. Her breathing deepened, her body relaxing into the seat, her fingers uncurling, her shoulders sinking. The train's motion was a part of her now, a part of her pulse, her breath, her very bones. She was not asleep, but she was no longer entirely present either. She existed in the space between, a place where the world was soft and quiet and slow. The train passed another stretch of track, the sound of the wheels changing subtly as it crossed a bridge. The bridge was old, its metal girders groaning softly under the weight of the train, their voices joining the chorus of creaks and sighs that made up the carriage's quiet language. The sound was deep, resonant, like the note of a cello played in a vast, empty hall. It vibrated through the floor, through the seat, through Alara's body, settling into her chest like a slow, deep breath. She felt it more than heard it, a sensation that was almost physical, almost tangible. It was the sound of the train moving through the world, of the world holding the train, of the two existing in harmony, in quiet conversation. The bridge passed, the sound fading into the background once more. The train returned to its steady rhythm, the da-da-dum of the wheels becoming a constant, unbroken thread. Alara's mind had grown quiet, her thoughts drifting like smoke in the still air. There was no need to hold on to them, no need to follow them.
They came and went, like the lights of the town, like the chime of the bell, like the scent of tea in the air. They existed and then they did not, leaving no trace behind. The compartment was warm, the air thick with the scent of wool and old wood, and the faintest trace of something sweet. The lamplight flickered again, just once, a brief hesitation in its steady glow. It was not a warning, not a sign of anything amiss. It was simply the light breathing, the way
all things breathe when they are alive and moving through the world. Elara's eyelids fluttered, her vision blurring, her body sinking deeper into the seat. The train's motion was a part of her now, a part of her pulse, her breath, her very bones. She was not asleep, but she was no longer entirely present either. She existed in the space between, a place where the world was soft and quiet and slow. The night outside was deep, the landscape hidden by the dark, but the train moved on, steady and sure, carrying its quiet passenger through the endless, peaceful dark. The rhythm of the wheels was a lullaby. The sway of the carriage a cradle, the warmth of the compartment a blanket. There was no need to hurry, no need to arrive. There was only the moving, and the moving was a form of rest. The train would continue on, and Elara would continue with it, carried along by the slow and unhurried current of the night. The fog would lift, the darkness would soften, the world would wake. But for now, there was only this. The quiet, the warmth, the gentle, undriven motion of the train through the endless dark. The train's rhythm is the only sound, a deep and steady pulse in the silent dark. The landscape outside is a formless, moving black, felt rather than seen. The gentle sway of the carriage is a constant rocking motion, a cradle for the senses. All sharp edges have been worn smooth by the long passage. There is only the hum, and the rhythm, and the cool night air whispering through the cracked window. The train continues, unhurried, its path a fixed and certain line through the sleeping world. With each rotation of the wheels, the day recedes further, becoming a distant, quiet echo. The present moment is all that remains. The vibration in the bones, the sound in the ears, the deep, enveloping dark. The train moves on and on and on.